Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this very, very special evening with a beautiful night to look at the memorial and the moon. My name is Wendy Rothfield, and I am very honored to be the Chair Emerita of the Community Commemoration of the 81st anniversary of Kristallnacht. I am a Holocaust survivor from Vienna, Austria, and endured the turmoil of the Nazi occupation there. Tonight, we gather to remember a dark time for our people that occurred on November 9th and 10th of 1938. That would foreshadow the ever greater darkness of years of the Holocaust. Tonight, we gather to honor the memory of the victims of the Nazi genocide. Tonight, we also stand together in opposition of the forces of evil and hatred and violence that once again are rearing their ugliness throughout the entire world. I know you will all join me in thanking those who have given of their time, energy, effort, and talent to make this evening possible. We are joined tonight by several consul generals and dignitaries. They are here this evening with solemn caring for this particular evening, and their presence is greatly appreciated. They are Pedro Agustin Valencia, Consul General of Colombia, Andrea Siegel, Consul General of Germany, Rosa Maria Merida de Mora, Consul General of Guatemala, Ruth Emmerich, Consul General of the Kingdom of Netherlands, Candido Kreis, Consul General of Spain, Baruch Ceylon, Consul General of Turkey, Lucio Aglioni, Vice Consul General of Italy, Gustavo Fernandez Briocco, Deputy Consul General of Argentina, and Takahiro Agrihaha, Deputy Consul General of Spain. Also, Jean-Pierre Hamal, Consul General of Trade of Canada. We also welcome some very prominent members of our Miami community. State Representative Michael Greco, Miami Beach, Miami-Dade Commissioner Esteban Bovo, Miami-Dade Commissioner Daniela Levine Cava, Miami Beach Commissioner Joy Malakoff, Mickey Steinberg, Commissioner Miami Beach, Lori Flink, who represents the Debbie Wasserman office in Washington, D.C. We also acknowledge and are dedicated to the founders of this memorial who made this evening and this event possible. Norman Brayman, Jack Chester of blessed memory, Dr. Helen Fagan, George Goldblum of blessed memory, Selig Golan, Ezra Katz, A. Bresnik of blessed memory, David Schachter, Rabbi Solomon Schiff, Harry B. Smith of blessed memory, and Kenneth Treaster. Please welcome Daniel Peltz, the program chairman of this evening.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you for your dedication for multiple decades of being a chair of this event. It is my honor to express a deep debt of gratitude to the Holocaust Memorial Chair, Sidney Pertnoy. He will be speaking later in the program. Please join me in the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner and Hatikva. Oh, say, can you see?
The
Thank you. A Jewish home was spray painted with a swastika and anti-Semitic graffiti, including the ominous warnings, "Watch yourself," and "We watch." A local Jewish cemetery was vandalized, with 73 headstones knocked down and smashed. The largest yeshiva in town was set on fire and spray painted with swastikas. These anti-Semitic attacks are not details from Kristallnacht. These three lesser-known events occurred in Canada, Romania, and Moscow, and are only three of more than 1,000 anti-Semitic attacks that occurred here and abroad last year alone. 81 years ago today, on November 9th and 10th, 1938, a similar hatred rained down in Germany and Austria. The streets were stained with blood and littered with shattered windows as 96 Jews were killed, 1,300 synagogues and 7,500 Jewish businesses were burned and destroyed. 30,000 Jews were sent to concentration camps. This calamitous event later became known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, and is considered the harbinger of the greater tragedy that would follow, the Holocaust. Tonight, as we mourn the tragic events of Kristallnacht, we must also call attention to the escalation of worldwide anti-Semitism in our own time. On this 81st anniversary of Kristallnacht, we declare that these assaults on Jewish individuals and institutions must stop. We call on all men and women of goodwill and open hearts to join us and put an end to the violence, hatred, and intimidation. Together, we can and must make a difference. Ladies and gentlemen, our Jewish community is blessed with many responsible leaders who share this belief. It is my pleasure to introduce one such individual whose enormous dedication and heartfelt commitment to the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach strengthens the Jewish people. He is chair of the memorial's board and a board member of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. Please help me welcome Sidney Pertnoy.
Thank you, Danny, and good evening, everyone. The Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach is a monument to the many emotions that we feel when we consider the Shoah. It is a virtual cemetery for millions of Holocaust victims who were murdered and disposed of without graves or markers. It provides testimony to this and future generations about the murder of 6 million Jews. Simultaneously, the memorial also eloquently expresses the implications of the Holocaust for civilization today and throughout time. In just this past year, 100,000 visitors from more than 40 countries have come to this memorial. They emerge with a greater understanding of Hitler's terror against the Jews during World War II and a shared resolve to prevent genocide and build a better world. Standing here, they confront the power of evil and learn that we must be stronger than the forces of hatred. The memorial staff and volunteers lead educational programs in our schools and for adult groups that enlighten the public and share the lessons of the Holocaust. As chair of the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach, I am honored to be with you tonight. I express our deep appreciation to the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for its support of this truly special community landmark while sharing the vital message of tolerance. Federation also cares for aging Holocaust survivors in our community, supporting programs that offer health care, nutrition, and companionship so they can live the remainder of their lives with dignity and independence. Ladies and gentlemen, here at home, the Anti-Defamation League reports that the U.S. Jewish community is experiencing near historic levels of anti-Semitism, including a doubling of anti-Semitic assaults. A total of almost 1,900 attacks against Jews and Jewish institutions across America occurred in 2018, just last year, a 48% higher number than for 2016 and almost twice the amount of 2015. Listen to these numbers: 1,900 attacks, each and every one causing personal pain and communal pain. These headlines are disconcerting. We are mindful of the cold-blooded murders at synagogues in Poway, California, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and in other Jewish communities worldwide. We read of anti-Semitic attacks on Jewish individuals and desecrations of Jewish institutions. These horrible, hate-filled incidents deeply sadden us, yet we must not feel defeated. We must speak out against them. We will not be silenced in the face of the most destructive and violent aspects of human nature. We will not permit hate to shape the future of our world. The messages of Kristallnacht, 81 years ago tonight, speak to us today, tonight, directly. Never again is now, ladies and gentlemen. Before concluding, I must acknowledge the tremendous loss to our community with the recent passing of Andrew Hall, the immediate past chair of the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach. Andy was a child survivor of the Shoah who dedicated his professional and personal life to defending the underdog. He was an articulate spokesman for the Jewish people and a bold advocate of social justice. The lessons of the Holocaust were deeply ingrained in nearly every aspect of his life. We want to acknowledge this loss and acknowledge his wife, Gail Myers, son, Adam Hall, and brother, Alan Hall, who are here with us this evening. May our memories of Andrew Hall inspire us to be equally vigilant in the face of oppression and equally committed to fulfilling his goal of promoting human rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney, for those moving thoughts and for your leadership here at the Holocaust Memorial. Many vivid impressions of horrors of Kristallnacht come from the written testimonies of eyewitnesses to the event. Next in our program, we will hear several diary entries of witnesses who survived the night. Please welcome Holocaust Memorial volunteers Vicki Einhorn and Stuart Gitlitz to read the accounts.
Facing the back of the building, we were able to watch how everything in the house was systematically destroyed under the supervision of the men of law and order, the police. At short intervals, we could hear the crunching of glass or the hammering against wood as windows and doors were broken. Books, chairs, beds, tables, linen, chests, parts of a piano, a radiogram, and maps were thrown through apertures in the wall, which a short time time ago had been windows or doors.
In the meantime, the mob standing around the building had grown to several hundred. Among these people, I recognized some familiar faces, suppliers to the orphanage or tradespeople who only a day or a week earlier had been happy to deal with us as customers. This time, they were passive, watching the destruction without much emotion.
At 10:15 a.m., we heard the wailing of sirens. We noticed a heavy cloud of smoke billowing upward. It was obvious from the direction it was coming from that the Nazis had set the synagogue on fire. Very soon, we saw smoke clouds rising up, mixed with sparks of fire. Later, I noticed that some Jewish houses close to the synagogue had been set alight under the expert guidance of the fire brigade. Its presence was a necessity since the firemen had to save the homes of the non-Jewish neighborhood.
In the meantime, our family had increased to 90, all of whom were placed in a small hall in the school. Nobody was allowed to leave the place. Men considered physically fit were called for duty. Only those over 60, among them people 75 years of age, were allowed to stay. Very soon, we learned that the entire Jewish male population under 60 had already been transferred to the concentration camp at Dachau.
Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Peter Reynes, who will describe his own remembrances of Kristallnacht. Dr. Peter Reynes is a Holocaust survivor and a retired professor of political science. He was 3 years old on Kristallnacht when his father, the president of a synagogue in Darmstadt, Germany, was intercepted by a Nazi soldier while trying to save a Torah. His father was sent to Buchenwald concentration camp before fleeing to England. In 1941, Dr. Reynes, his older brother, and his mother boarded a ship to the United States, only to be diverted to Cuba, where they lived for 2 years before being reunited with their father in Connecticut. Please welcome Dr. Peter Reynes.
Since 1933, the dark clouds were already impacting our family. My grandparents and my parents lived in Großzimmern, Germany, where by 1938, anti-Semitism had taken its toll. Only 70 Jewish people remained, many migrating to larger cities or emigrating. By 1939, Großzimmern considered itself Judenfrei, free of Jews. My grandfather, Max Goldschmidt, had a leather goods business and was forced to sell under dire conditions. My parents had earlier moved 8 miles away to a much larger city, Darmstadt, which about 130,000 people, and married in 1928. There my dad had been practicing law since 1925. My grandfather soon joined us, my grandmother Josephine Meyer having died in 1930. Our middle-class life was torn apart by Kristallnacht, as you've just heard. My dad, the president of the Liberal Synagogue of Darmstadt and president of the B'nai B'rith, ran to rescue the Torahs from the burning temple. That synagogue had dated from 1876. One of the 2 destroyed synagogues. The other was the Orthodox synagogue to which my grandfather belonged. The result was my father was arrested among 169 Jews arrested that night from Darmstadt and sent to Buchenwald concentration camp for several months for reasons of, quote, protective custody from the brown shirts. As Nazis were still expelling Jews at this time, in the months that followed, my dad managed to get a visa to England, and he departed in mid-1939. I remember watching my father getting into a car while my mother held me in her arms. I was 4 years old. I was not to see my father again for 4 years. My brother Gus, who was age 10 at that time, told me that after his release from Buchenwald, my dad was a changed person. He was never the same again. Once seen, he had seen Nazism as a passing phenomena, someone like what we see Trump today, possibly. But after Buchenwald, he saw Nazism as a mortal threat. My dad had been a loyal social democrat who fought patriotically for Germany in World War I. He was wounded by machine gun fire in June 1917. After recuperating, he joined his regiment in September 1917, 2 months later. In August 1918, he was captured by the French. He escaped prison and was recaptured, trying to find his regiment, and finally released in 1920. He won multiple medals, including the Iron Cross as a Frontkämpfer, a frontline fighter. My dad had studied law at the University of Berlin and Gießen and received his law degree at Heidelberg University. He practiced law with his brother-in-law, Karl Hess, and we lived a comfortable life in a house on 18 Riedelstrasse, at just a 10-minute stroll across the square to the Wilhelminstrasse in Darmstadt. When I was born in 1935, around the time of the Nuremberg laws, my dad was asked by a friend, "How could you have another child at this horrible time in Nazi Germany under such terrible conditions?" My dad answered in German, "Es ein Lust zu leben," it's a pleasure to live. Among my earliest memories, however, were going to the basement with my mother, my brother, my grandfather every night at midnight in 1940 as the British bombers flew punctually overhead on their bombing raids. My mom told me at that time, most of our neighbors ignored us. They would not greet us in the street. There was one woman who kept greeting my mom, and she was an aristocratic lady named Fräulein von Linger. I guess her view was, as an aristocratic woman, she wasn't going to let some petty bourgeois control her life. I also remember my brother being beaten up by Nazi youth while he pulled me in a sled in the winter of 1940. After the Nuremberg laws were passed, my brother and I had to attend Jewish schools in Darmstadt. He remembered the trips to the school were filled with the danger of daily harassment by Nazi youth. My brother also recounted this story. One day in 1940, he was watching a military parade by a returning military battalion. They had just taken over Paris, and they came back to Darmstadt full of, the sweet victory of taking over Paris. So I had this victory parade in Darmstadt. She was standing next to a German woman who befriended my brother. So when the Nazi flag came by, my brother didn't salute. So she suddenly turned on my brother and said, "The Jude Bengel," like, "you Jewish riffraff." Such was the situation. By 1940, my father was gone. Our family was resettled in the Jewish ghetto on Salbaustrasse, a section of Darmstadt. At that time, my mother was jailed for 2 months for bringing bread to my Uncle Ludwig, who was in jail in Darmstadt. He had been arrested. That's what they did at that time. They would arrest Jews for phony charges, and they mobilized him as part of a Jewish brigade to shovel snow. He was never released, apparently because among my uncles and dad, he was the most, audacious. He apparently made eye contact with the Nazis. He was transferred to Gross Rosen concentration camp, and the family was later notified that he died, quote, of a heart attack in 1942 at the age of 46. My father had been able to get to the U.S. from England in 1940. However, when my mother tried to get a visa to the U.S., there was significant resistance from the State Department to allow Jews into the U.S. I heard that my mother cried in Darmstadt at the consular office and was told in excellent German by the U.S. consul to stop crying or she would be thrown out of the office. A new law in mid-1941 prohibited the immigration of Jews. The lawyer in Darmstadt, Benno Joseph, interceded with the Darmstadt Gestapo based on our previous permission to leave and the fact that my brother was 11, I was 6, my grandfather was 76, which left only my mother as an age of a potential laborer and a caregiver at 39 may have saved us from the camps. Benno Joseph, we owe our life to him. He was a heroic Jewish lawyer who stayed to the very end, helped Jews get visas to third countries. He and his wife died in Theresienstadt in 1943, but he was able to send his 3 children to England in 1939 via the Kindertransport. We finally managed to get visas to Cuba and left in September 1941. We traveled in probably the last sealed train with Jewish refugees from Berlin through occupied France to Barcelona and on to Havana. My brother Gus wrote in a journal of our trip that in Berlin, at the last moment, the Jewish Relief Organization took our tickets away because we mistakenly took a taxi to the Potsdam railroad station, which we didn't know was forbidden. We sat for an hour in sheer terror, you can imagine. My mother almost collapsed before the tickets were returned to us and we were able to proceed. As you know, by November 1941, all Jewish immigration was ended. The final solution was initiated at Wannsee Conference in January 42. Its intention was, of course, to liquidate all Jews in Germany and in all of Europe. Our ship from Barcelona was the Via de la Madrid, and we were very lucky because, as you know, the St. Louis was turned back 2 years earlier in June 1939 because World War II had not yet begun, so there wasn't the sense of the peril for Jews at that point, and the United States was heavily isolationist, and I suppose Roosevelt was running for a third term, and Cuba and Canada did the bidding of U.S. immigration, so St. Louis, they couldn't go to Cuba, U.S., or Canada. We arrived in Havana in October 41. After almost a month at sea, the last hours were again fraught with great fear as the ship's doctor diagnosed my eye irritation as possible glaucoma. This meant we might not be permitted to enter Cuba and be returned to Spain, which would have possibly ended with our death eventually. My mother begged that a Cuban doctor come on board. And amazingly, he looked at my eye and said, it's just an irritation, and we were allowed to enter Havana. We remained in Havana for 18 months, and then the U.S. entered the war at Pearl Harbor in 41. So the result of that, instead of just being Jewish immigrants, we were suddenly enemy alien immigrants, even though we were Jewish. We lived in the Grand Hotel in Havana, and I have to say, our life was not unpleasant. My brother had his bar mitzvah in Havana. My mom earned a hospital certificate to work as a first aid worker. My brother and I went to a De La Salle school in Havana. My mother wrote my father how proud she was that my brother and I were getting good grades. And at that time, I was pretty rambunctious 7-year-old, and people used to complain that on weekends I would run up and down the second floor of the hotel, keeping people from having their siesta. So one neighbor told my mother, quote, Peter would be a new generation of Jews that would not fear anything. Nevertheless, my poor mom and dad missed each other, now so much closer and yet still so far apart. We finally received our visas and came to the U.S. in February 43. I recall arriving at Penn Station and running across the main rotunda, and one of my memories is jumping into my father's arms and knocking his fedora hat off. That's one of my strong memories. I don't know how I remembered him, but I somehow recognized him. Now, the 4-year separation between my mother and father must have had a deep impact on my dad, because he died of a heart attack just 10 months later at the age of 49, as we were preparing to go to synagogue on a Saturday morning. My grandfather died in 1944. The repercussion on my mom was also profound as well. She had a nervous breakdown in 1948 and would die of stomach cancer in 1953 at the age of 51. In November 2013, I returned with my daughter Maria and my son Paul, who is here with his wife Jane and daughter Flora and a friend of the family. We went to Darmstadt to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. While there, we witnessed the celebration of the Memorial Museum that had been added to the entrance of a new wing of a recently built hospital with the support of the municipality of Darmstadt. Ritula Frankel, an artist who became friends of my family, had overseen its founding and display. In preparing the ground for the hospital construction, workers in 2003 had dug up fragments of columns, stones, and red, blue, and white broken window glass from the old Jewish liberal synagogue destroyed in 1938. Now, Ritula's parents were the first German Jewish concentration camp survivors to return to Darmstadt, got married, and Ritula was the first German Jewish baby born there after the Holocaust in 1952. In 2016, I returned again with my children to lay a Stolperstein in Darmstadt for my uncle Ludwig, who died in Gross Rosen in 42, and my aunt Alice, and my cousin Margaret, who died in the Sobibor camp in 1944. We also visited a squared glass exhibit by the same Ritula Frankel, the artist, at the railroad siding dedicated to 300 Jews left in Darmstadt by the spring of 42, who were taken from there to the Piaski ghetto in Poland. Most of them were then transferred to Sobibor concentration camp, where they perished. A small aside, this may seem insignificant, but it was a big impact on my son Paul and my daughter Maria. I took my children to my old home on Riedeselstrasse, which was now replaced by an apartment building. However, the sandbox that I played in and the neighboring wall in the yard still remained after all these years. This despite the fact that 80% of Darmstadt having been destroyed by firebombing British air raid in September 1944. Last year, in 2018, I was invited back to Darmstadt along with several other survivors to celebrate the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht and the 30th anniversary of the reinstallation of the liberal synagogue inaugurated in 1988. While in Darmstadt, I was presented a plaque in honor of my uncle by marriage and my dad's law partner, Karl Hess. He had been president of Darmstadt's oldest sports club between 28 and 33 before being prohibited from such participation. In April 2016, the club named the entrance to Darmstadt's soccer stadium as the Karl Hess Platz. So there was such a feeling that this Jew who was so important in this soccer club should be named, Platz should be named after him. The plaque said in part, "The future requires remembrance." At that time, I visited the Stolperstein of Benno Joseph. was hoping this wouldn't happen, but because he saved our family. And, and also the Stolperstein of my kindergarten teacher, Benjamin Korber, who I remember is one of my memories. My mother went to class one day. I remember this was traumatic for me. She said, "Is Peter a good boy in school?" And he said, "Oh, he's an angel," because she said he's a devil at home. So I do want to leave you with this. The Liberal Synagogue's Jewish community wrote this to my departing dad, who was the last president of the Liberal Synagogue, in June 1939. They wrote to him, "When rabbis and cantors left Darmstadt, you have given high standards to many services with aesthetically beautiful recitals of the Haftorah. With your manifold talents and your comprehensive knowledge, we have to speak with Jonathan when he spoke to David. You will be missed because your place will be empty in our midst." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reynes, for sharing your experiences with us. We were so moved by your family's story, which is part of our people's story. We would be honored to place the names of your family members on the wall of the Holocaust Memorial that surrounds the arm of love and anguish that can be seen from here. That wall, with over 33,000 names, serves as the tombstone for so many of our people. We honor the memory of Max Reynes, Bettina Goldschmidt Reynes, Ludwig Reynes, Alice Suss Reynes, Marguerite Reynes, Karl Hess, Benjamin Korber, whose names will be known by all who come here. Now, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Helen Chasset, a second-generation survivor. Her presentation is entitled, "I Will Not Be Silent."
Thank you, Peter. I also want to thank Dr. Reynes. I feel privileged, as I'm sure many of you do, to hear his childhood memories set in such wonderful historical context. I think it was a really unique, and thank you, Dr. Reynes. If you remember, if you recall, well, first let me just say that I'm the daughter of two Holocaust survivors, Manya Mel Sachs of blessed memory, and my father, Israel Joe Sachs, up until a couple of years ago, was a regular volunteer docent here at the memorial, and he cannot be with us tonight. I was born in displaced persons camp in Germany, and my father actually served in the labor camp Gross Rosen, where Dr. Reynes's uncle passed away. So I know the horrors of that camp. Earlier in Sidney Portnoy's remarks, he said, "We must not remain silent." And a couple of weeks ago, there was a message sent out on the Holocaust Memorial's Facebook page, inviting people all over from all over the world to use the prompt, "I will not be silent in the face of." And so what I'm going to do is read to you some of the responses that we've received back through email to the Holocaust Memorial from various places. Sergio from Manuel, Texas says, "I will not be silent in the face of despair." Jessica from Miami says, "I will not be silent in the face of apathy." Jason from Miami, "I will not be silent in the face of ignorance." JR from Lower Taugandava in the Philippines says, "I will not be silent in the face of anti-Semitism." Rebecca from Hedgesville, West Virginia says, "I will not be silent in the face of injustice, hatred, or racism." James from Detroit says, "I will not be silent in the face of hate." David from Miami says, "I will not be silent in the face of bigotry." Rona from Indiantown, Florida says, "I will not be silent in the face of hatred and oppression." And in addition to these responses, there were many, many more with the same themes. Our educators and volunteer docents who work with the children that come visit the memorial also gave some of the children these cards to fill out. And I'd like to read to you some of the cards that the children, mostly middle school children, what their responses were. I will not be silent in the face of false information. I will not be silent in the face of bullying. I will not be silent in the face of dictatorship. I will not be silent in the face of immigration issues. I think that listening to those children's responses, we have hope. And I'd like to close with a Facebook response from Robert in Aventura. I will not be silent in the face of anti-Semitism any place in the world. Thank you.
Expressing our deepest emotions, even when The words of the Torah and scriptures give comfort and consolation in times of sadness. Leading us now in the recitation of the 23rd Psalm is Ariella Jamovich. From Hebrew Academy, a student participating in the Memorial's Names Not Numbers program.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He revives my spirit. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my foes. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thank you, Ariella. Now I invite Rabbi Joseph Kunis of Temple Menorah to share with us his thoughts about Kristallnacht.
Shalom, good evening. Originally, Rabbi Elliot Perlson, Senior Rabbi of Temple Menorah, was scheduled to speak this evening, but he was called away on happy occasions. His daughter had a baby, and so he's in New York on the occasion of baby naming. So we wish the entire Perlson family a mazel tov. And Rabbi Perlson had also prepared a few words, and so if you allow me to first just share a few of his words. Rabbi Perlson wrote that tonight we gather to observe the 81st anniversary of Kristallnacht, the 48-hour-long pogrom that signified the beginning of the most heinous period in Jewish history, the Shoah. We live today in an era when many say we are once again experiencing similar grave social indicators of the Holocaust, unprecedented rise in anti-Semitic attacks, as you've heard, and record publication and decimation of hate speech and anti-Jewish sentiments calling for attacks on Jews, Jewish institutions, and Jewish places of worship. I find solace, Rabbi Perlson wrote, however, in an expression that started in Pittsburgh last year at the Tree of Life Synagogue. Pittsburgh, stronger than hate. Isn't that the same message that our great rabbis and theologians have taught throughout the ages? Is it not the same philosophy of Elie Wiesel of blessed memory, who consciously chose to abandon revenge and hate and chose to teach love and healing? I'm reminded of the story of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, who went to Austria and Germany in the early 1990s to perform concerts of Jewish music. He had been born in Vienna and he had escaped with his parents and brothers while the rest of his family all perished in the ghettos and the camps. And while he was there, he met with Jews as well as non-Jews. He sang with them and he prayed with them. People criticized him. They asked him why he did it. After all, look at these people had done to him and his family. Don't you hate them? He was asked. His answer was, if I had two souls, I would devote one to hating them. But since I only have one, I don't want to waste it hating. We just have one life, one soul. We shouldn't waste it on hating. Surely not on the children of the Nazis who are not guilty of the sins of their fathers and mothers, and surely not of the people around us. On this night we dedicate to holy memory. Let us learn from the ethical teachings of our great tradition. Let us affirm that our love is greater than their hate. We will dedicate our singular soul to love one another. We must dedicate ourselves to light and not to darkness, to healing and not to pain, to life and not to death. For truly then the flames of the burning synagogues and Jewish institutions 81 years ago will become a beacon of strength and hope for our children and grandchildren, a light of hope for all future generations. Amen. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to add one brief personal thought of my own. My grandfather, Cantor Mordechai Vogel, is still alive and well, living in Los Angeles at 94 years old, is a survivor of Auschwitz. And he would weave story after story about his wonderful Jewish life in Sighet, Romania, until the Nazis sent the entire Jewish community to Auschwitz in May 1944. Although his mother and all but 2 of his 9 siblings were murdered by the Nazis, although his emaciated father died shortly afterwards, and his sister, who I knew well, became deaf from Dr. Mengele's experiments, nonetheless, my grandfather, Martin Vogel, became a Jewish community spiritual leader, leading services every day, 3 times a day, opening and locking up the shul, a legend in old school Jewish Los Angeles. And I once asked him the following question as we sat around the Shabbat table and he sung in his authentic European accented Hebrew the end of the Birkat HaMazon in a beautiful tenor voice. Zaida, I asked him, you sing this Kapitel Tehillim, these words from King David in the Psalms at the end of benching, the end of the grace after meals, with such passion and meaning. But I don't understand how you can say these words. But he would still sing it every day, and every Shabbat he would sing, Nahar Hayiti, V'gam zakaneti, V'lo raiti, Tzadik nezav, V'zaro mivakesh, Lachem, which means I was young and now I am old. And I never saw a righteous person forsaken or his children begging for bread. I asked him, I said, this is you, Zaida. You were young and now you're old, but you literally saw with your own eyes in the ghetto in Sighet and later in Auschwitz, righteous people like your own father and precious little children starving and begging for bread. This is the opposite of what King David writes. Doesn't this disprove everything you believe in? My Zaida, confused, looked at me for a moment and simply said, I don't know what you mean. I daven every day because I'm a Jew. I say a bracha and I say the grace after meals because I'm a Jew. I give tzedakah because I'm a Jew. End of story. From Martin Vogel and from countless others who rebuilt our Jewish community from the ashes, we learn true faith. We learn that we need to do the right thing to be a light unto the nations simply because that is what God expects from us. End of the story. Remember the passage for the end of the Birkat HaMazon where I questioned my grandfather? It's actually not the last line of benching. There is one more holy verse. Adonai oz li'amo yitein, Adonai yivarech et amo Vashalom. That's how he would sing it. And that means, O Lord, give strength to your nation. O Lord, bless your nation with shalom, with peace. As we remember the night of broken glass this evening, let us also remember so many of those whose faith the Nazis could never shatter. And let this prophecy ring true for our families and for all the people of Israel. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Kunis. The deaths of the 6 million Jews murdered during the Shoah are forever in our hearts. We call upon Rabbi Solomon Schiff, past chair of the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach, to lead us in the recitation of El Malach Rachamim, the traditional Hebrew prayer for the souls of the deceased.
Please rise. First, I want to thank Wendy Rothfield the Kristallnacht Chair Emeritus, who has been serving in this capacity over these many years with a great job. I know that God will bless you, continue your inspiration to all of us. I want to thank Daniel Pels as the new Kristallnacht Program Chair. I know you will follow in this great tradition. Heil Molerachamim, Shochein Bameromim, Hametei Menuchanachono, Tachas Kanfei Hashchino, Bemalus Kedoshim Etorim, Gezoar Olakia Masirim, Esenishmos, Achenu V'Yachiosenu, Shenehergo, V'Shenishchatu, V'Shenisrefo, V'Shenitveyu, V'Shenechniko, B'Machanos Agetos Bashoa, Al Kiddush Hashem, Bahu, Shenachtem Mispalalim, B'Zalias Nishmosom, Beganei Den Tehei Melechosom, Lochein Balarachim Yasirrehem, Behesei Sekehenof Leolamim, Veitzro Betzolachayim Es Nishmosom, Adino Nachalosom, V'Yenucha V'Shalvam Nishkovom, V'Nomar Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Schiff. The Kaddish is one of the most familiar of all Jewish prayers. It reaffirms our faith in God, even when we have experienced great personal loss. Please join Holocaust survivor George Gabor and Rabbi Joshua Kunis as they lead us in this ancient prayer.
Yizkarar v'yizkarar shemira v'yam b'yom divrei shirotem v'yam malchustei v'chayim ayom v'yom v'chayim b'chol b'Yisrael v'agadav avizan kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba v'rarach le'olam u'mei almaya Yizborach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh Yishadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha b'richu V'leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiram b'alma v'imru amen Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'rimra hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Before concluding this ceremony, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us. Your presence had made this event even more meaningful and is deeply appreciated by the committee of dedicated volunteers who organized tonight's program. Also, special thanks to Sharon Horowitz, the Executive Director of the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach, and her wonderful staff for all their work for tonight's program and every day. We close with the singing of the Hymn of the Partisans, led by cantor Stephen Haas of Temple Beth Shalom. Please rise.
If you know the words, please join me. They're on the back of your program. Sag nicht kein Mal, als du gehst im letzten Weg, Himmle bleien verstehen, boye Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, es wird erpeugt und unser Trott mir sehnen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, es wird erpeugt und unser Trott mir sehnen da. You must not say that you now walk the final way, because the darkened heavens hide the blue of day. The time we've longed for will at last draw near, And our steps as drums will sound that we are near. The time we've longed for will at last draw near. And our steps as drum will sound that we are here. Von grünen Palmen und des weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen mit unser Pein und unser Weh. Und gefallen sitzt, spritzt noch unser Blut. Sprotzen wird doch unser Gewurre, unser Mut. Und verkalken spitzt wird unser Blut. Sprotzen wird doch unser Gewurre, unser Mut. From land all green with palms to land all white with snow, we now arrived with all our pain and all our woe, where our blood stood out and came to touch the land. There our courage and our faith will rise and stand, where our blood sprayed out and came to touch the land. There our courage and our faith will hit the land. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Himmler bleien, verstehen, bleiet Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird abheugt und unser Trott, wir sehnen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird abheugt und unser Trott, wir sehnen da.
And this concludes our evening. Thank you.